Definitely working. I can see your screen. The floor is yours and the screen is too.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Cathy, and as Emily said, and tonight I'm going to tell you about my PhD, which is looking at the effects of landscape connectivity on feral cats in agricultural ecosystems. So biodiversity loss in New Zealand has been rapid since people arrived, bringing with them pest mammals and causing landscape level changes by converting indigenous ecosystems to agriculture. Sheep and beef farms make up approximately 40% of the total area of New Zealand, which is greater than the total area of conservation estate, which sits at 31%. These farms contain 25% of our native vegetation, which includes 17% of New Zealand's native forests, meaning that critical conservation gains can be made by improving biodiversity on this land use type. The added benefit of this is, of course, the prevention of erosion, improved water quality, and benefits to the climate. Projects such as the Billion Trees program is also encouraging revegetation in New Zealand. Revegetation will improve landscape connectivity in agro-ecosystems, which can improve the functional connectivity for different species. Functional connectivity differs between species, as they have varying abilities to cross gaps between patches of habitat and require differing sizes of habitat. For example, birds like the New Zealand robin require less than 100 metres between patches of habitat, while the tui will fly kilometres. Plantings can increase the habitat within a patch and/or bring patches closer together, meaning that there's less distance between patches, particularly benefiting birds, but also benefiting less mobile animals as well. So here are a couple of landscape examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So on the left, you can see there are a number of patches of habitat, but they're reasonably small and don't have much connection between them. Here on the right, there's a larger patch of habitat and other patches of habitat to connect it up to a larger patch over here and here. This environment would be expected to be more beneficial to a number of native species, particularly birds. However, this improved connectivity could also work well for invasive mammals too, such as possums, rats, stoats, and feral cats. If work is being done to enhance native biodiversity and improve connectivity in an agricultural landscape, then this increasing connectivity for native species could also enhance pest mammal populations and facilitate their movement, negating any biodiversity benefits. Feral cats are found globally and inhabit a diverse range of habitat, including agricultural lands, urban areas, forests, and even subantarctic islands. They are of particular concern as they have been an important contributing factor to at least 14% of bird, reptile, and mammal extinctions globally, and 33% of bird, reptile, and mammal extinctions on islands. In New Zealand, they have caused the extinction of 6 bird species and contributed to the decline of a number of other birds and reptiles. Okay, feral cats are generalist predators that will feed on both vertebrates, so for them that mainly includes mammals, birds, and reptiles, and invertebrates, which mainly means insects, depending on what's most readily available. In New Zealand, they predominantly feed on rabbits and rodents, but also have a healthy appetite for birds as well, including kingfisher, as you can see there, as well as reptiles and insects. Managing feral cat populations requires spatially explicit knowledge to enable strategic deployment of management devices, to help understand when native species are most likely to be at risk from feral cats, and to mitigate the spread of cat-vectored diseases such as toxoplasmosis. An understanding of how the cat is using the landscape can help in filling this gap and help determine management options such as strategic trap deployment. Some of the spatial concepts that are important to understand include home range sizes and habitat selection. Home range is an important part of an animal's ecology to understand, as it can help in species management by helping determine appropriate spacing of management devices. Home range is the area that an animal covers while carrying out its normal activities, such as foraging, hunting, mating, and caring for young. It is commonly measured using GPS or VHF and can be estimated using a number of different methods. Home ranges tend to vary based on a number of different factors, such as the time of year, so whether it's a breeding season or not, the habitat the cat is living in, with more productive habitats having smaller home ranges. Productive habitats are habitats that have more resources, so more food and shelter. So for example, arid environments, cats tend to have much larger home ranges. Sex, with males tending to have larger home ranges than females. Males tend to have larger home ranges as they cover a larger area looking for mates, while females' home ranges is more regulated by prey availability. And the size of the cat is also another factor, with bigger cats tending to have bigger home ranges than smaller cats. Having an understanding of habitat selection can help with feral cat management by determining which parts of the landscape should be the focus of management, and where native species are most likely to be at risk. Habitat selection is a behavioural process that can be described as different habitat types being preferred or avoided. A habitat that the cats seem to prefer more tends to involve linear features, habitat boundaries and complex habitats. General habitat types or components that this includes involves infrastructure, riparian areas, shrublands, forests and woodlands. While habitat that tended to be avoided, but this seemed to be very study dependent, might have been agricultural lands and grasslands. Cats are probably using different parts of the habitat to fulfill different needs. Some of the factors to determine why feral cats are choosing particular habitat types include prey availability and hunting opportunities. So highly variable habitats can provide more hunting opportunities for cats, or habitats with high levels of suitability for rabbit have also been found to be preferred by feral cats. Another factor is to avoid threats like predation and competition. Feral cats have been found to change their habitat use after foxes have been controlled in Australia. Shelter availability can also have an effect on feral cat, where feral cats are choosing to, their habitat. They seem to like to shelter in vegetated areas or places like rabbit burrows. And human resource subsidies can also attract cats. This can mean infrastructure, like a nice shed, which can provide shelter, and rubbish dumps, and chicken coops, which can provide food resources. There hasn't been a lot of explicit research into what is driving habitat choices. It's been mainly based on observational studies. So another factor to consider is feral cat density, which refers to how many cats are actually in the area that is under management. The number of cats is highly variable and depends on the habitat and how much resources like food and shelter are available. It can be difficult to get an accurate estimate of actual cat density within an area, but cat relative abundances can be estimated using camera traps or large tracking tunnels. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't logistically possible to collect feral cat relative abundances. But I do know, although I don't have this data, that when I was out on farms carrying out my study, which I'll tell you about shortly, I saw a number of cats. I saw them on the camera. I saw completely different ones when I was out on the farm walking around, or out hunting with the farmer, and there appeared to be very high numbers of cats around. So tonight I'm going to tell you about two parts of my PhD, and I'm going to start with a movement study I conducted in an agricultural ecosystem. So one of the aims of my PhD is to look at the fine-scale movement of feral cats from a range of sheep and beef farms within the Auckland region. I'm using this data to look at home range sizes of feral cats on farms, but I'm particularly interested if feral cats are choosing more connected vegetated areas within the landscape to make their home ranges, and also looking at if differences in landscape connectivity within a home range affect the habitat selection of the feral cat. This meant last year that I went out on farms trapping cats, putting collars on them and tracking them. So I set out a number of traps on each farm in locations that farmers thought there might be cats because they had seen them there, or places that cats were likely to be, based on what I described to you earlier. So maybe near farm tracks or near the edges of bushy areas. I had the traps set up for a few weeks with bait added every few days to acclimatise the cats to the traps. And I also had cameras set up to see what was taking the bait from the traps. As I could only set the traps based on my ethics approval when the weather was okay, and Auckland in winter tends to mean plenty of rainy nights apparently, having information from the cameras about which traps the cats were most keen on meant that when the rain had a night off and I set the trap, I knew which traps to set, and that I also managed to get most of my cats within the first night or two of having that trap set. So after I caught a cat, I sedated it to put the collar on. To do that, I restrained the cat at one end of the cage using the dividers that you can see in the images. This meant the cat was unable to move and hopefully was conveniently exposing its back leg muscle for me to inject the sedative into, as you can see there. I would then remove the dividers, cover the trap for 10 minutes or so, and then check to see that the cat was asleep. If it was still on the alert side of life, I'd give it a half dose more of the sedative and then some more time, and that was generally sufficient for the cat to safely have the collar put on. Before putting on the collar, I'd check to make sure the cat didn't have a microchip. I also had pictures from the farmers and any of their neighbours of their cats to check to make sure it wasn't one of theirs. And behaviourally, all the cats seemed pretty feral. I also weighed the cat to make sure it was heavy enough to have the collar on, and I measured its length. That's just some photos of me putting on the collar. So I gave the cat another injection to reverse the sedative, and then I gave it enough time to be well awake, and then I would let them go. So this is just releasing the cat. So once a week, I'd go out onto the farm, track the cat down and download the data from the collar remotely. I just needed to get close enough to the cat to do this, and how close I needed to get seemed to depend on where the cat was hanging out. So if it was down a hole or not, or if the cat had managed to damage the collar. So sometimes I had to get very close, like within meters, whereas other times I think I was at least 100 odd meters away. So this is the remote downloading device that I used. Most of the cats I tracked for 6 or 7 weeks before the battery of the collar died, but there was one cat's collar that only lasted 4 weeks, and another one that I managed to get 13 weeks of data off. One of the cats I caught was this one. It was a feisty juvenile male that moved home ranges a week or so after I put the collar on, which meant that I had several weeks where I was struggling to track him down. I assumed he surely hadn't crossed the ditch, but apparently he had. I did eventually track him down with the help of the farmer. He'd moved 2 farms across, and I was getting a pretty strong signal from him over a kilometre away from where he was. He'd found himself a nice shed on the top of the ridge that looked pretty cosy. Interestingly, he did pop back to his original home range for a night during the 6 weeks I was tracking him before heading back to his shed. That's me tracking the cat. He's just across there. And once I'd found him, I could just stand on the top of that hill and download the data from him on the other side. So he became one of my very easy cats to get data off eventually. See, the cows are all very interested in what I'm doing as well. So in total, I managed to put 14 collars onto 14 cats and get data off all of them. These came from 11 different farms from around the South Head and South Kaipara area. I also collected data on rabbit relative abundances, rodent relative abundances on these farms. I managed to get 9 of the 14 collars back. Some of these collars came from the farmer shooting the cat for me, and I saw some very impressive shooting from some of my farmers, or from me retrapping the cats. The retrapping was interesting in that some of the cats were pretty silly. I think these were mainly the younger ones, and they were quickly recaught, while others were definitely more cautious. This cautiousness for some meant that they seemed like there was no way they were going to go near the trap at all. And as I had their data, I did know where the main areas they were hanging out. Well, a couple of others were just very careful in how they engaged with the trap. They clearly seemed to understand how the mechanism worked, so they would take the bait and not get caught. However, when I changed trap types on them, I did manage to get them back. So far, I've used the data I've collected to determine the home range sizes of the cats. I've started to look at habitat selection, but this analysis is still underway, and I don't have any results at the moment to share with you on that. I'll show you some of the raw data that I collected from the cats though. So this is just the home range sizes of my cats. These ranged from 4 to 900 hectares, with a median home range of 165 hectares. Most of the cats seem to spend a lot of time in bushy areas, and some did go around buildings, like hanging around the chicken coop. So you can see here all the points that were recorded by the collar. The collar was recording data every 10 minutes, and there's 10 weeks worth of data from this particular cat. This cat was particularly painful to get data off each week. He was the biggest cat I caught, and weighing in at about 5 kilos, and I think he was very smart. I have a strong suspicion he also damaged his collar. As one week I actually had to have the remote downloading device partway down the rabbit burrow he was hiding in. With the farmers, we tried with the farmer several times to get to try and shoot him, but it was pretty evident that as soon as we showed up, he was off. And I know this farmer was a particularly excellent shot because he easily took out one of my other cats straight through the eye from absolutely miles away. Here is the same data, but it's showing the home range size. So the light yellow areas is the 100% kernel density estimated home range. The redder areas show the core areas that the cat was using. This farm didn't have as much vegetation as compared to some of my other farms, but it had a much higher levels of rabbits, and the cat seemed to be making use of these rabbit burrows. Here is an example of a different cat. Its collar only recorded or lasted for 4 weeks, which is why there's far fewer points on the map. And if you look at where those points are falling, you can see it spent quite a lot of time in vegetated areas. And this is just the tracks of the cat I told you about earlier. You can see he started up there and then he moved around down here. Yeah. And finally, I'll tell you a little about the last part of my study, which involves looking at the gut contents of cats that have been caught on farms and seeing how this relates to landscape connectivity. So as areas that have greater levels of vegetation that are better connected could have higher bird populations, this could result in greater predation by feral cats of birds compared to areas with lower levels of vegetation and connectivity. So over the last year or so, I have been sent 110 cats, mainly from farmers, but also pest control groups and one council. These cats came from Northland, Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Taranaki and Marlborough. Some of these cats have been live captured and then shot, which is what occurred in areas where there was a higher chance of someone's beloved pet cat coming in contact with a trap. And I had a number of cats that were killed using Steve Allen traps, and a couple of cats that happened to be caught just from a Tim's trap, which had been baited with peanut butter or flour and an icing sugar mix. Most of the traps, though, had been baited using rabbit or pet food of some description. A few of the cats were shot by the farmer when the opportunity had presented itself. And one of the farmers I was doing my movement study on his farm kindly rang me up one day and said he'd pulled a cat out of, that had been blocking his drain if I wanted it. So that was a memorable cat. So there's a few photos that people might not want to look at over the next few slides. So I removed the guts of the cat and sorted through the contents. That's just images of me taking the guts out. And so far I've been through 108 cats, and I can tell you that they all had a lot of parasites. I also found cats weren't particularly big on chewing their prey. And I found rabbits and mice and rats in there. This particular cat, which I think was from Taranaki, had 13 rabbit feet inside of it, and some pretty cute little ears as well. I also found an eel, some skinks, some chicks, and birds like rosella and pigeon. So 43 of my cats had evidence of bird remains. 5 of them had skinks inside of them, with one of the cats having 3 skinks. Other things I found included a frog, sheep's wool, probably lamb's wool, and a couple of the cats. And 42 of the cats had some invertebrates in them as well, which for some of them was just a few weta, but in several just stuffed to the brim full of crickets. So eventually the location of where each cat was trapped will be mapped, and the land use will be determined, and the connectivity measures of the vegetation in this area will be assessed. I'll be looking at the relationship between what I found in the guts and these connectivity measures, but I haven't done that yet. But I thought people might like to see some of the things I did find and enjoy some photos. On a final note, I don't know if anyone saw a wee while ago now, a few months back, in the ODT, there was an article referring to cats being spayed or neutered and then being released on farms to help manage rabbit populations. And I'm sure, in this audience, I don't really need to say what a terrible idea this is, but I thought I'd just mention it. So feral cats down there have been found to be mediated by what's called bottom-up processes. This means that feral cats are regulated by the number of prey, which in this case would be rabbits, rather than the rabbit numbers being regulated by the number of cats. So the high numbers of rabbits can really help drive the cat populations up, which then means more cats to eat things we don't want them to eat, such as native birds and reptiles. So that, generally means that pest control needs to be a multi-species affair. And aside from the fact that cats won't actually be managing the rabbit populations, as I mentioned before, I've now been through a lot of cat guts, and they're all full of parasites. Most of the cats were in a reasonable condition when I saw them, but there were definitely several cats that were not thriving in life. So I think there's also animal welfare issues to consider with these sorts of things. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to all the people who have sent me cats and farmers that let me do my work on their farms. Does anyone have any questions or any stories they would like to share about feral cats they've encountered?
We've got one question in the chat. For everyone else, there is a chat button at the bottom of your screen. Please type in your question there. The question from Robert: would it be much more difficult to track cats in dense bush, given the difficulty of picking up satellites in such terrain?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I think when the cats were in particular environments like dense bush, or if they were down rabbit holes and things, that I'd lose the signal. So I wouldn't actually be able to track them until they, came out or were into a more accessible space.
Another question from Jane this time. Do feral cats have any predators in New Zealand other than humans? No, I guess dogs, but not really other than dogs.
like in other countries, there's definitely a lot more, like in Australia, they have foxes and dingoes. I think they're more affected by foxes than they are by dingoes, but in New Zealand, no. But they, yeah.
And what about what you'd find in their stomachs? Would that be the same in domestic cats?
What was that, sorry?
The question here is from Jeanette. Do you imagine the same ingredients would be in domestic cats? So I assume that's in their stomachs. Yeah.
Probably to a lesser extent. I mean, yes, domestic cats do hunt birds and skinks and insects as well. I mean, they wouldn't be primarily relying them as prey, but you do definitely find those things in domestic cats as well.
Good. You kind of hinted to this, but how do you tell if a cat is a feral cat in a live capture trap? And how do you avoid catching someone's pet there?
What I did was made sure that I had photos from the farmer and their neighbours within a radius of where I was trapping on the farm, so that I could hopefully visually identify anything. And I also had a microchip reader. So I did have to sedate the cat in order to use the microchip reader. But I was hoping from those two things it would weed out any domestic cats. And then also, I mean, the cats, I'm sure someone's pet cat could also be a bit feisty in the cage, but these cats were definitely didn't appear friendly as well.
Yes.
So, and yeah, I mean, if you're doing trapping in your own area, that's something to be aware of.
Yep. In one of the maps, Elise asks, the cat was in the water. Was this a bit of GPS inaccuracy, or was the cat really in the water?
No, that would have been the GPS being inaccurate. Like if it doesn't connect to enough satellites, or, I mean, there's always a level of error in the GPS reading anyway. And then, yeah. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Did any of the collars get shot? Is Paul's question.
Yes.
Before or after you finished your study?
I mean, I had most of the data off that collar anyway, but potentially there might have been a few more days of data on that collar, but yeah, no, one of the collars got shot. The cat was dead though. Oh, the cat ended up dead, so that's the main thing.
Yep. Did your data capture the time of day or night the cats were mostly moving?
I have. That's part of what I'm looking at the moment with my analysis. So I imagine there might be some variation within the cats, but it'll be interesting to see if there's differences in when they're moving or how they're moving. So if they're moving more in bushy areas during the day, or more in areas where they're less exposed during the day compared to at night, or yeah, so it'll be interesting that's part of what I'm doing at the moment.
Lots of analysis to come, huh?
Yeah, it's amazing how you start making progress and then you go around and start again, but it's getting there.
Great. Well, maybe you can also come back and have a chat to us once you've finished all your analysis sometime next year, I suppose.
Yeah.
So from Colin, a question what your favorite bait was and where the preferred places to put the traps were.
So I was using rabbit, and I had some the dry race stuff as well, which some of the cats liked, but rabbit seemed to be cats seemed to really go for the rabbit. I did use cat food when I changed to a different trap type to get the cats back, and that seemed to work as well. But I liked the rabbit, but the cat food seemed to work fine too. And I found the edges of the bush seemed to work quite well for the cats, but it was amazing. Like, yeah, I mean, there was cats. There's a lot of cats out there, which yeah, you guys probably know.
Did you know ahead of time the cats had such a wide home range?
I've been doing the first part of what I was doing was looking at I was doing a meta-analysis on home range sizes of cats, which I haven't talked about tonight. So I was aware that there's a big variety of home range sizes in cats. So in urban areas, they can be quite small, like just a few hectares, whereas in Australia, they've found them to be absolutely massive, like compared to what I was like a few thousand hectares. So it's very variable.
Yeah, you already mentioned that some cats might not have the best life. How long do you expect a feral cat survives in the wild?
I'm not actually sure. To be honest, I'm not sure. It probably is quite dependent. Like I imagine there's quite a bit of mortality in the young, and then if some of them do well, they might last a few, kind of a normal life. Probably not the 20 years of your, pet cat, but still not too bad. But yeah, I imagine there's quite a high mortality in the young cats.
What caused you not to be able to recover the GPS collars?
Some of the cats are just too smart for me. Some of them I put quite a bit of effort into, and it was just like, oh well, it's there's only so much you can do before you accept defeat.
Yep, I can imagine. Yeah. One more question, then we have more of an observation. Your opinion, how can we convince cat lovers to keep their cats inside at night?
I think sometimes from the perspective of what's actually good for the cat. Like, it's not that, like, there's cars and other dangers out there in the world that cats face. And in other countries, I think, where there's even more things like predators and stuff, that can get the cat, then it's more kind of acceptable to keep your cat inside. But we don't have that. I think so. Kind of the approach of it keeps your cat safe as well as protecting native birds and things. Maybe I don't know. I think
Yeah. Did you sustain any injuries or face any opposition from Megan? I assume she means opposition from people, not so much from cats, but
yeah, some of the cats were, it seemed a bit opposition to the no injuries. We sedated the cats so that they were manageable, and if they needed topping up, then they got topped up so they could be handled safely.
Yeah.
I was lucky. My father is a vet, so he was helping with the. He was holding the cats for me while I put the collars on, so I was very fortunate.
Great. And did you face any opposition from humans who didn't want you to do this, or?
No, I think probably because people. I sent out things to say that I was looking for places to do my work, and people approached me to say I could do that. So people were incredibly helpful to me in doing my work. Like very helpful.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Jeremy has more of something to share, but it would be good to hear your experience on that. He says, I have culled feral cats in many locations, and it's interesting that feral cats appear to revert to the grey-black fur color, almost invisible under gorse bushes, whereas the Australian ferals turn to the red-orange color. One of the most obvious traits of feral cats is their extreme hostile attitude if caught and desire to flee when encountered. Any comments on that color?
I've definitely heard people talk about the fact that with feral cats, you tend to get a lot more tabby type coloration because that does blend in. I guess a lot of the cats I had were tabbies. There was a grey cat, a dark grey cat, and a couple of black cats, and I had one ginger cat. But I'm not sure. But that's an interesting observation. I guess it's cool. And I definitely I would concur on the hostile attitude. They're not friendly.
No, I am. I've seen some cats in cat traps, and they're indeed not very helpful.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to just put your hand in.
No. We got a thank you from Mark. This was the last question. If anyone else has a question and they can't find the chat button, but they can find their unmute button, then I would say we probably have 5 more minutes for people to ask a question verbally, if that's okay with you, Cathy.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, let's listen if we hear anyone. No, I think mainly thank yous coming up here. So definitely from me as well. A thank you. One more observation from Megan. An observation in talking to my father who hunts. They're all allies in ridding cats from our most remote area in the absence of any strategies. I'm not sure if I'm reading this out right. They're allies in ridding cats from our most remote areas. So I think she means other hunters. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, no, I talked to a few hunters, and they seem to be quite difficult things to shoot in general, because they are elusive. But if they had the opportunity to shoot them, they would. Yeah. So
the question, do you think all feral cats need to be destroyed? They're not living good lives?
Well, I'm sure some of them are living very happy lives, feasting on things we'd rather they weren't feasting on. But from a native biodiversity perspective, yes, I think it would be that if we could get rid of all our feral cats, that would be amazing, or at least keep the numbers well down, and that would really help our native biodiversity. But,
do you have any numbers on feral cats?
No, I don't think there are people I don't think there are any. I'm not sure how many there are out there. There are a lot out there. People who the fact that I got sent 110 cats, and people are just keep catching them. There's a lot out there. And one of the farmers thought, oh, I don't know that you'll see any cats on my farm, but we might have some. And then when I had cameras with the traps, and I can't remember, but maybe 5 or 6 different cats. And then I managed to catch a completely different cat from what I'd seen on the cameras and put a collar on. And then there was a lot of cats out there.
Yeah,
I think more than people are aware.
Yes. Robert's got his hand up, so let's see. Robert, go ahead, unmute yourself. Yes, Robert, it's you. I can't hear Robert.
Can I talk? Yes, Murray.
Yes. Hi, Murray. Yep.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
I don't like cats because of what they do. And in the mountains as well. I've seen them in the mountains and what they've done. But I was shocked at a recent talk on Radio New Zealand by I think a dock ranger with many, many years experience and saying how bad they were. And the general response from the public after that was, oh, don't touch our moggies, we can't do that at all. And I sort of threw my hands up thinking that this is the perfect sort of place for people to understand what they do, but they still want to keep their moggies and don't believe, what they do every night.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. There are a few suburbs popping up where I don't think people are allowed cats, but in general, I think people do. I mean, lots of people I know love their cats. I'm not really a cat person myself, but more of a dog person. But yeah, it's. I think if you can keep your cat inside, it can make a big difference. But
yeah, indeed. Okay, I think that's the last question. Yeah, people can't believe their cats eat native birds. Now, if I would get $1 for every time someone says my cat doesn't do that, I'd be very rich. I think you would be too, Cathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cathy, do you have any last final words? Or
thank you very much for having me.
Great. So same from us. Thank you very much. Brilliant presentation. Absolutely. I'm glad I heard it again. I obviously don't have a great recollection because a lot of this was new to me. So thank you very much.
Robert has another question.
Okay, we're not in the chat. I can't see that in the chat because we can't hear him. I can just hear beeps. So Robert, if you want to put something in the chat, please do that. Because we can't hear him.
Hear anything, Jan?
Now we can hear you. Yep.
Wrong mic. Went to standard. Doesn't matter. What I'm wondering, Cathy, very good talk. If you could tell us where to from here. What might be follow-up research, and how do you see it your research being utilised?
I like to finish what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm hoping when I finish going through my analysis with the habitat selection stuff, I can then be able to provide more information and maybe good places to put traps and things. And also how cats are using farms. So hopefully in terms of a management perspective. Hopefully it could be useful from an education perspective as well, in terms of saying this is what they are eating. They're not just eating rabbits and mice on farms, they're eating a number of other things. Yeah, that's my main focus at the moment. I mean, it's nice to have research. I think from my perspective, I think having research that's like, it's really cool, all the research that happens in like high value conservation estate type areas, but it's useful to also have research occurring in an agricultural setting, because it is such a large part of the country, like in terms of, you know, land area, like 40% of the country's agricultural land. So having research from a like pest mammal perspective, I think is good, is helpful. My project developed out of like there'd been work happening with the bioheritage people looking at farms and increasing biodiversity, and that had all been, you know, looking at increasing biodiversity, but not so much from what that increase could mean in terms of pest mammal stuff. So it'd be interesting to look at a broader suite of pests as well. I think like there's it's quite difficult and challenging to get for the mustelids and stuff like this to have information from those. That would be quite cool, like to have collars and or to catch enough of them to have collars and to get a good sample size of those would be really challenging, but that would be pretty cool. I think that answers the question.
Perfect. Jeremy, a question, last question. Does Cathy need any support or information from the public in the future?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
If you do, you might just want to reach out and we can send it to our Forest and Bird members, and who knows, we might be able to help you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I am closing it off here. Thank you all participants for being here. Hopefully we'll see you next month. Thanks for your patience as well. A couple of technical hiccups, but most of it worked very well. Also thanks to Cathy. Super great presentation, and from all of us, we wish you the best of luck with your last hard year of PhD analysis. And when we can meet up in person, usually our speakers do get a bottle of something nice. I'll have to wait until I can see you in person for that, but I'm sure that will happen one day as well.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ngā mihi, matua, hope to see you all next month. Thank you.